January 1967 arrives cold and uncertain, the new year carrying with it the weight of unfinished revolutions and promises not yet fulfilled. In living rooms across America, families gather around television sets to watch the war unfold in grainy black and white, to hear politicians speak of light at the end of tunnels that seem only to grow darker and longer. On college campuses, students debate whether to drop out, tune in, resist the draft, or simply try to survive the chaos engulfing their generation. The music on the radio still carries echoes of simpler times: surf rock, girl groups, the British invasion's polished pop. But something is shifting, some tectonic movement beneath the surface of American culture, and when a small Los Angeles record label releases an album by four unknown musicians calling themselves The Doors, the tremor becomes an earthquake. The album arrives with little fanfare. Elektra Records, primarily known for folk music, has taken a chance on this strange quartet whose sound defies easy categorization. They are not quite rock, not quite blues, not quite jazz, not quite anything that has come before. The cover is stark and unsettling, four faces emerging from shadow, the central figure's gaze direct and challenging, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. No bright colors, no psychedelic swirls, no indication that this music will offer comfort or escape. The title, simply The Doors, suggests both an invitation and a warning. What lies beyond these doors? And do you dare to find out? The opening track announces intentions immediately. No gentle introduction, no easing the listener into the experience. Instead, a Vox Continental organ slashes through the silence like a blade, followed by a voice that seems to come from somewhere deep and primal, commanding attention, demanding transformation. The song urges listeners to break on through to the other side, though it never specifies what that other side contains or what must be destroyed. To reach it, the urgency is palpable, the rhythm driving forward with relentless momentum. This is not music for passive consumption. This is a call to action, a manifesto delivered at 120 beats per minute. Ray Manzarek, the organist whose right hand plays bass lines that most bands require an actual bassist to produce, is 28 years old and trained in classical piano. He brings to rock music a sophistication and complexity that elevates it beyond three-chord simplicity. Robby Krieger, the guitarist, is only 20 years old, but plays with the maturity of someone who has studied flamenco and jazz, who understands that space and silence can be as powerful as notes and volume. John Densmore, the drummer, comes from a jazz background, bringing rhythmic complexity and dynamic range that transforms simple rock beats into something approaching art. And Jim Morrison, the vocalist and lyricist, is a 23-year-old UCLA film school graduate who has somehow channeled Rimbaud and Nietzsche, Blake, and the Beats into rock and roll poetry that is by turns seductive, threatening, mystical, and raw. They met in Los Angeles, this strange city of angels and demons, of movie dreams and street-level nightmares. Manzarek encountered Morrison on Venice Beach in 1965, two former film students crossing paths at a moment when both were directionless and searching. Morrison mentioned he had been writing songs. Manzarek asked him to sing one. Morrison, shy and uncertain, delivered words about moonlight drives that revealed a poet's sensibility lurking beneath the surface. Manzarek immediately recognized potential. They recruited Krieger and Densmore, began rehearsing, started playing small clubs on the Sunset Strip. By 1966, they had secured a residency at the Whiskey A Go-Go, where they served as house band 6 nights a week, honing their sound and building a following among the city's bohemian underground. The album they record at Sunset Sound in August 1966 captures this raw energy, this sense of four musicians who have discovered something powerful and are desperate to share it before the moment passes. Producer Paul Rothchild, borrowed from the folk world, but intuitive enough to recognize that these rules don't apply here, makes crucial decisions. He lets Morrison record vocals live with the band rather than overdubbing later. He preserves the spontaneity and intensity of performances that other producers might have deemed too imperfect, too raw. He understands that what the Doors offer is not technical perfection, but emotional truth, and his production serves that truth. The album's second track shifts from urgency to seduction. Morrison's voice drops to a whisper, inviting the listener into an intimate space where soul and kitchen meet, where fried chicken and metaphysical hunger intertwine. The song is ostensibly about music, soul music, kitchen music, but like all great Doors songs, it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Manzarek's organ creates a sultry groove. Krieger's guitar adds tasteful punctuation. Densmore's drums provide a hip-shaking pulse. Morrison delivers the lyrics with a knowing smirk, audible in every syllable. This is music that understands pleasure, that refuses to separate physical and spiritual appetites, that celebrates the body as much as the mind. But the album refuses to settle into any comfortable groove. Track 3 takes a hard left turn into darkness and paranoia. The protagonist is pursued through a desolate landscape of broken homes and twisted faces, the music building intensity through repetition and accumulation rather than conventional verse-chorus structure. Morrison's vocals shift from narrative storytelling to primal incantation, his voice rising in pitch and intensity until it becomes a scream of genuine terror or perhaps liberation, the two states increasingly difficult to distinguish. This is rock music as psychodrama, as exorcism, as something approaching shamanic ritual. The fourth track brings the listener back to earth, or at least to the semi-solid ground of a blues rock groove. But even here, in what might initially seem like straightforward rock and roll, the Doors inject strangeness and complexity. Morrison sings about Alabama and getting loose, but the delivery suggests deeper hungers than simple hedonism. Krieger's slide guitar work recalls the Delta blues tradition while pushing it into new territory. The song rocks hard, but never abandons intelligence or artistry in pursuit of pure, visceral impact. Then comes the song that will change everything, though in January 1967, as the album first appears in record stores, no one yet knows this. It is tucked away as the opening track of Side 2, 7 minutes and 6 seconds of hypnotic groove, poetic lyrics, and Morrison's voice weaving spells that seem to bypass conscious thought and speak directly to some deeper, more ancient part of the brain. The song was written by Krieger, inspired by a book about ritual and transcendence, but it belongs to all four of them, each contributing essential elements. Manzarek's organ introduction has become one of rock's most recognizable openings, those descending notes suggesting both sunlight and something darker, both beauty and danger. Krieger's guitar solo, when it arrives after Morrison's first verse, is economical and perfect, every note serving the song rather than the ego. Densmore's drumming propels without dominating, creating a foundation that allows the other elements to breathe. Before we continue deeper into this story, be part of our channel. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story we've prepared for you. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. Morrison's lyrics speak of fire and desire, of funeral pyres and wires getting higher. Images that resonate on multiple levels without ever resolving into a single definitive meaning. This ambiguity, this refusal to be pinned down, becomes one of the Doors' defining characteristics. Their songs mean what each listener needs them to mean, reflecting back the listener's own desires, fears, hopes, and hungers. The song builds gradually, hypnotically, Morrison's voice rising and falling like waves, like breathing, like the act the lyrics ostensibly describe, but which clearly signifies something larger, something approaching spiritual transformation. But 7 minutes is an eternity in the world of AM radio, where songs must fit between commercial breaks and attention spans are measured in seconds. Radio programmers who hear the album recognize the song's power, but cannot play it in its full form. Elektra Records faces a decision: edit the song for radio, or accept that their most commercial track will receive limited airplay. They choose compromise, creating a shortened version that runs just over 3 minutes, the instrumental passages truncated, the architecture compressed. The band resists, but eventually accepts this necessary betrayal, understanding that reaching the world sometimes requires sacrifice. The album continues with a song that showcases Morrison's literary aspirations. The lyrics reference the 20th century Alabama and getting to the show, but they do so with a density and elusiveness that recalls poetry more than typical rock lyrics. Morrison delivers them with a sneer and a smile, his voice dancing around the melody rather than simply following it. This is not singing in the conventional sense. This is something closer to speaking in tongues, to channeling voices from beyond the veil. Another track explores the relationship between fathers and sons, using the metaphor of cars and driving to address deeper issues of inheritance, rebellion, and identity. Morrison's own complicated relationship with his father, a career naval officer representing everything Morrison has rejected, bleeds through the lyrics, though never so explicitly, that the song becomes mere autobiography. Like all great art, it transforms personal experience into universal statement, allowing every listener to hear their own family dynamics reflected in the music. The album's penultimate track returns to the intimate whisper of earlier songs. Morrison's voice close and confessional, speaking of back doors and soft parades, of love that is strange and transformative. The music is gentle, almost tender, a momentary respite before the storm that will close. The album. This dynamic range, this willingness to shift between modes and moods, demonstrates the Doors' sophistication, their refusal to be locked into a single approach or aesthetic. And then comes the finale, the track that will define the Doors for many listeners, that will establish Morrison as rock's most fearless and controversial poet, that will prove popular music can address taboo subjects with intelligence and artistry. It is an 11-minute epic that begins with acoustic guitar and Morrison's whispered vocals, building through narrative verses about killers and riding the King's Highway, escalating into a climax that addresses Oedipal themes with a directness that leaves some listeners shocked and others feeling finally understood. The band has been performing extended versions of this song at the Whiskey A Go-Go, sometimes stretching it past 20 minutes, using it to close sets with cathartic intensity. The studio version captures this energy while maintaining focus, Morrison's vocals shifting from whisper to scream, the band building tension and release with the precision of experienced dramatists. The controversial passage arrives around the 7-minute mark, Morrison's voice rising to declare his desire to kill his father and possess his mother, the raw Freudian ID erupting through civilization's thin veneer. Some critics will call it brilliant, a fearless exploration of psychological truth. Others will condemn it as obscene provocation, as evidence that rock music has crossed a line that should not be crossed. But everyone who hears it recognizes that something significant has happened, that boundaries have been pushed, that the conversation about what popular music can be and say has fundamentally shifted. The album ends with the band stripping away layers until only Morrison's voice and sparse instrumentation remain, the music dissolving into whispered words about blue buses and destinations unknown. It is an ending that offers no resolution, no comfort, only the sound of a journey that continues beyond the album's confines into the listener's own psyche and experience. In January 1967, this album enters a world not quite ready for what it offers. Initial sales are modest, reviews are mixed, some critics praising the band's originality and ambition, others finding them pretentious and deliberately obscure. Radio play is limited. The edited version of their most commercial track receives some airplay, but many programmers remain cautious, uncertain how to categorize this strange hybrid of rock, blues, jazz, poetry, and something altogether new. But word spreads. College students discover the album and recognize their own alienation and hunger reflected in Morrison's lyrics. The counterculture, still coalescing and defining itself, hears in the doors a soundtrack for their rejection of mainstream values. Young people who feel trapped by their parents' expectations, who question the war and the system that produces it, who seek transcendence and transformation rather than mere entertainment, embrace the album as a statement of purpose and possibility. By February, sales begin to climb. The album enters the charts, initially in the lower regions, but steadily ascending as more listeners discover it. Radio stations that initially ignored the band begin to reconsider. The edited version of their breakthrough track starts receiving regular airplay. Program directors note the listener response, the calls requesting the song, the sense that something is happening here, that this band and this album have tapped into a cultural current that is only beginning to flow. March brings increasing momentum. The album cracks the top 100, then the top 50. Music journalists who initially dismissed the Doors begin to reassess. Feature articles appear in underground newspapers and eventually in mainstream publications. Morrison's face, beautiful and unsettling, begins to appear on magazine covers. The band's mystique grows. Stories circulate about their intense live performances, about Morrison's unpredictable behavior, about music that feels more like ritual than entertainment. By April, the inevitable happens. The single version of their breakthrough track reaches #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, sitting atop the charts for 3 weeks. The album itself climbs to #2, kept from the top position only by the juggernaut of the Beatles' latest release. But in some ways, the Doors' achievement is more remarkable. They have come from nowhere, from the underground clubs of the Sunset Strip, to challenge the most famous band in the world. The success brings complications. The band is invited to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show, the ultimate validation of mainstream acceptance and the ultimate test of their willingness to compromise. The show's producers, nervous about the lyrics of their hit single, request that Morrison change a specific word during the live broadcast. Morrison agrees during rehearsal, then deliberately sings the original lyric when the cameras go live. The producers erupt in fury. The band is told they will never be invited back. Morrison shrugs. He has made his point. The Doors will not be neutered for mass consumption, will not sand down their edges to become safe and palatable. Summer 1967 becomes the summer of love in San Francisco, with its flowers and acid, its utopian rhetoric and communal idealism. But the Doors, based in Los Angeles and temperamentally inclined toward darkness rather than light, offer a different vision. Their music acknowledges the shadows that the flower children try to ignore, the violence and chaos lurking beneath the rhetoric of peace and love. Morrison, increasingly seen as a spokesman for the counterculture despite his ambivalence about the role, speaks in interviews about the necessity of confronting darkness, of breaking down structures, of destroying to create. The album continues to sell through summer and into autumn. By the time 1967 ends, it has sold over 1 million copies, spending much of the year in the upper reaches of the charts. It has established the Doors as one of the most important bands of the era, proven that rock music can be both commercially successful and artistically ambitious, expanded the possibilities of what popular music can address and achieve. It has also created expectations and pressures that will eventually contribute to the band's dysfunction and Morrison's tragic trajectory. But in the moment, in 1967, The album represents pure possibility. It demonstrates that four musicians with vision and courage can create something that changes culture, that shifts the conversation, that gives voice to the inarticulate longings and fears of a generation. Every track contributes to a cohesive artistic statement, an album that demands to be experienced as a whole rather than as a collection of discrete songs. This approach, the album as unified work of art, will influence countless subsequent musicians and reshape the music industry's understanding of what albums can be. The production values, while technically primitive by later standards, serve the music perfectly. The four-track recording captures the band's raw energy and spontaneous magic, the sense of musicians discovering something in real time rather than constructing it through layers of overdubs. Rothschild's decision to preserve imperfections, to let Morrison's voice crack with emotion, to allow the band's jazz-influenced looseness to remain audible, proves crucial. The album sounds alive in ways that more polished productions often do not. Each band member's contribution is essential and irreplaceable. Manzarek's organ work, playing bass lines with his left hand and melodies with his right, creates a full sound that belies the trio format. His classical training and jazz sensibility bring sophistication to rock arrangements. Krieger's guitar work, influenced by flamenco and blues, and jazz, provides color and texture rather than simply rhythm or lead. His solos serve songs rather than ego, each note chosen for maximum emotional and musical impact. Densmore's drumming, schooled in jazz but applied to rock, brings dynamic range and complexity that most rock drummers of the era cannot match. His willingness to leave space, to use silence as a musical element, gives the arrangements room to breathe. And Morrison, the focal point and the lightning rod, brings to rock music a literary sensibility and theatrical presence that changes what a frontman can be and do. He is not simply a singer, but a poet, a shaman, a provocateur, a beautiful disaster in leather pants. His voice, untrained but instinctive, shifts from whisper to scream, from seduction to menace, from intimacy to apocalyptic pronouncement. His lyrics draw from high culture and low, from classical literature and pulp fiction, from philosophy and street-level observation. He transforms rock singing from mere vocal performance into something closer to possession, to channeling forces larger than himself. The album's influence ripples outward through the remainder of the decade and beyond. Bands that were content to play it safe, to replicate proven formulas, hear the Doors, and recognize that different choices are possible. The notion that an album can be an artistic statement rather than a collection of potential singles gains credibility. The idea that rock music can address serious themes, psychology, philosophy, politics, sexuality, without losing its visceral power becomes accepted wisdom rather than radical proposition. Critics and scholars begin to take rock music seriously as an art form, and the Doors' debut provides crucial evidence that such seriousness is justified. The album is analyzed in academic papers, discussed in terms usually reserved for literature and film, recognized as more than mere entertainment. Morrison's lyrics are compared to poetry, the band's arrangements to jazz composition, the overall achievement to works of serious art. But there is also backlash. Conservative critics and cultural gatekeepers view the Doors as evidence of rock music's corrupting influence, proof that the counterculture represents not liberation but degradation. The controversial 11-minute epic becomes a focal point for debates about obscenity, artistic freedom, and the role of popular culture in shaping young minds. Radio stations in some markets ban the album entirely. Parent groups organize protests. The controversy only increases the album's appeal among young listeners eager to embrace whatever their parents condemn. The album's commercial success also creates template and trap. Future Doors albums will be measured against this debut, compared and often found wanting. The pressure to replicate success while also evolving artistically creates tensions within the band. Morrison, in particular, struggles with the expectations created by this initial triumph. He wants to be taken seriously as a poet and artist, but the mass audience primarily wants him to be Jim Morrison, sex symbol and rock star, endlessly repeating the persona he partly created and partly had thrust upon him. Looking back across more than half a century, the album stands as a remarkable achievement. A debut that arrived fully formed, confident in its vision, uncompromising in its execution. While the Doors will release other important albums, will continue to evolve and experiment, they will never again capture quite the same magic that marks this initial statement. There is something about a debut, about artists hungry and desperate to prove themselves, that cannot be replicated once success has been achieved. The album that set 1967 ablaze continues to burn across decades. New generations discover it and find that its themes remain relevant, its music still powerful, its vision still challenging. The specific cultural moment that produced it has passed, but the fundamental questions it raises about identity, freedom, desire, mortality, transformation remain as urgent as ever. Morrison's voice, preserved on magnetic tape, continues to whisper and howl, to seduce and threaten, to invite listeners through doors they might fear to open but cannot resist exploring. The four men who gathered at Sunset Sound in August 1966 could not have known they were creating something that would endure and influence for generations. They were simply trying to capture the magic they had discovered playing 6 nights a week at the Whiskey A Go-Go, trying to translate the intensity of their live performances into vinyl grooves. That they succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation speaks to the mysterious alchemy that happens when talent, timing, and vision align perfectly. The album represents a moment when American culture was tearing itself apart and remaking itself simultaneously. When young people questioned every assumption their parents held sacred, when the future felt both terrifying and filled with possibility. The Doors channeled this moment, gave it voice and soundtrack, helped define what it meant to live through these strange days. The album is both a time capsule and a timeless work, both utterly of 1967 and somehow beyond any single moment. As the year progressed and the album's success became undeniable, the Doors found themselves transformed from underground sensations to cultural phenomena. They toured relentlessly, playing to increasingly large and enthusiastic crowds. Morrison's behavior grew more erratic and extreme, his drinking heavier, his performances more unpredictable. The success that the album brought carried seeds of future destruction, as fame and expectation pressed down on a man temperamentally unsuited for either. But before all that, before Miami, before Paris, before tragedy and legend, there was this album, this remarkable debut that announced the arrival of something genuinely new and necessary. 11 tracks, just over 43 minutes, that expanded rock music's possibilities and proved that popular art could be both successful and uncompromising, both accessible and challenging, both entertainment and transformation. The doors the album opened remain open, beckoning new listeners across generations to break on through to the other side, to light their fires, to embrace the strangeness and danger and beauty that exists beyond the comfortable and familiar. The music endures because it speaks to something permanent in human experience. The hunger for transcendence, the fear of mortality, the desire for connection, the need to break free from limiting structures and discover what we might become if we dare to fully live. In January 1967, this album arrived and changed everything. The fire it lit continues to burn. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story we've prepared for you. See you in the next story.